Welcome to the Passion Week and Eastertide readings for Good Friday. The Watchword. From Psalm 112, verse 1. Happy are those who fear the Lord, who greatly delight in his commandments. And the hymn verse, Lo, the good shepherd, for the sheep is offered. The slave hath sinned, and the son hath suffered. And from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 24 and 25. By his wounds you have been healed, for you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. The readings for Friday. The trial before the Sanhedrin. When day broke, there was a meeting of the elders of the people, attended by the chief priests and scribes. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus on which they might pass the death sentence, but they could not find any. Several indeed brought false evidence against him, but their evidence was conflicting. Some stood up and said, We heard him say, I am going to destroy this temple made by human hands, and in 3 days build another, not made by human hands. But even on this point their evidence was conflicting. The high priest then stood up before the whole assembly and put this question to Jesus. Have you no answer to that? What is this evidence these men are bringing against you? But he was silent and made no answer at all. The high priest put a second question to him. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? The words are your own, answered Jesus. Moreover, I tell you that from this time onward you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power of God, and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then they all said, So you are the Son of God then? I am, said Jesus. What need of witnesses have we now, they said. We have heard it for ourselves from his own lips. At this the high priest tore his clothes and said, He has blasphemed. There. You have just heard the blasphemy. What is your opinion? And they all gave their verdict. He deserved to die. The trial before Pilate. When he found that Jesus had been condemned, Judas, his betrayer, was filled with remorse and took the 30 pieces of silver back to the chief priests and elders. I have sinned, he said, and I have betrayed innocent blood. What is that to us? They replied. That is your concern. And flinging down the silver pieces in the sanctuary, he made off and went and hanged himself. The chief priest picked up the silver and said, It is against the law to put this into the treasury. It is blood money. So they discussed the matter and bought the potter's field with it as a graveyard for foreigners. And that is why the field is called the Field of Blood today. They then led Jesus to the praetorium. They did not go into the praetorium themselves, or they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. So Pilate came outside to them and said, What charge do you bring against this man? They replied, If he were not a criminal, we should not be handing him over to you. Pilate said, Take him yourselves and try him by your own law. The Jews answered, We are not allowed to put a man to death. They began their accusation by saying, We found this man inciting our people to revolt, opposing payment of the tribute to Caesar, and claiming to be Christ a king. So Pilate went back into the praetorium and called Jesus to him. Are you the king of the Jews? He asked. Jesus replied, Do you ask this of your own accord, or have others spoken to you about me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? It is your own people and the chief priests who have handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, Mine is not a kingdom of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my men would have fought to prevent my being surrendered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this kind. So you are a king then, said Pilate. It is you who say it, answered Jesus. Yes, I am a king. I was born for this. I came into the world for this, to bear witness to the truth, and all who are on the side of truth listen to my voice. Truth, said Pilate. What is that? The mocking and the scourging. Pilate went out again to the Jews and said, I find no case against him. And the chief priests brought many accusations against him. Pilate questioned him again. Have you no reply at all? See how many accusations they are bringing against you. But to Pilate's amazement, Jesus made no further reply. But they persisted. He is inflaming the people with his teaching all over Judea. It has come all the way from Galilee where he started down to here. When Pilate heard this, he asked if the man were a Galilean, and finding that he came under Herod's jurisdiction, he passed him over to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at the time. Herod was delighted to see Jesus. He had heard about him and had been waiting for a long time to set eyes on him. Moreover, he was hoping to see some miracle worked by him. So he questioned him at some length, but without getting any reply. Meanwhile, the chief priests and scribes were there, violently pressing their accusations. Then Herod, together with his guards, treated him with contempt and made fun of him. He put on a rich cloak and sent him back to Pilate. And though Herod and Pilate had been enemies before, they were reconciled that same day. Pilate then summoned the chief priests and the leading men and the people. You brought this man before me, he said, as a political agitator. Now I have gone into the matter myself in your presence and found no case against the man, nor has Herod either, since he has sent him back to us. As you can see, the man has done nothing that deserves death, so I shall have him flogged and then let him go. At festival time, Pilate used to release a prisoner for them, anyone they asked for. Now there was at this time a notorious prisoner whose name was Barabbas, then in prison with the rioters who had committed murder during the uprising. When the crowd went up and began to ask Pilate the customary favour, Pilate said to them, Which do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he realised it was out of jealousy that the chief priests had handed him over. The chief priests and elders, however, had persuaded the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus. As one man they howled, Away with him! Give us Barabbas! Pilate was anxious to set Jesus free and address them again. But in that case, what am I to do with Jesus, who is called Christ, the man you call King of the Jews? They shouted back, Crucify him! Crucify him! And for a third time he spoke to them. Why? What harm has this man done? I have found no case against him that deserves death, so I shall have him punished, then let him go. Pilate then had Jesus taken away and scourged. The soldiers led him away to the inner part of the palace, that is the praetorium, and collected the whole cohort around him. Then they stripped him and made him wear a purple cloak, and having twisted some thorns into a crown, they put this on his head and placed a reed in his hand. To make fun of him, they knelt to him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head with it. The sentence. Pilate came outside again and said to them, Look, I'm going to bring him out to you to let you see that I find no case. Jesus then came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said, Here is the man. When they saw him, the chief priests and the guards shouted, Crucify him! Crucify him! Pilate said, Take him yourselves and crucify him. I can find no case against him. We have a law, the Jews replied, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard them say this, his fears increased. Re-entering the praetorium, he said to Jesus, Where do you come from? But Jesus made no reply. Pilate then said to him, Are you refusing to speak to me? Surely you know I have the power to release you, and I have the power to crucify you. You would have no power over me, replied Jesus, if it had not been given you from above. That is why the one who handed me over to you has the greater guilt." From that moment, Pilate was anxious to set him free, but the Jews shouted, "If you set him free, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who makes himself king is defying Caesar." Hearing these words, Pilate had Jesus brought out and seated himself on the chair of judgment at a place called the Pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, as he was seated in the chair of judgment, his wife sent him a message. "Have nothing to do with that man. I've been upset all day by a dream I had about him." It was Passover preparation day, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," said Pilate to the Jews. Take him away, they said. "Crucify him." "Do you want me to crucify your king?" said Pilate. The chief priests answered, "We have no king except Caesar." Then Pilate saw that he was making no impression. In fact, a riot was imminent. So he took some water, washed his hands in front of the crowd, and said, "I am innocent of this man's blood. It is your concern." And the people to a man shouted, "His blood be on us and on our children." And their shouts were growing louder. Pilate then gave his verdict. Their demand was to be granted. He released the man they asked for, who had been imprisoned for rioting and murder, and handed Jesus over to them to be crucified.